sleeping like all day, I can say to him, I need 5 minutes of silence. I'll set the
Mm-hmm.
alarm. And he
Mm-hmm.
understands that. And he watches the
Yes.
alarm. And when it goes off, I can say, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that kind of communication helps to not only train your child on how to communicate their needs, but also it helps them to really understand and be able to honor what you need as well.
Welcome to the Relational Parenting Podcast. I'm Jennifer Hayes, a parent coach and 20-year childcare veteran. Each week, I sit down with my own father, Rick Hayes, and discuss the complicated issues that parents face today, as well as some of the oldest questions in the book. From the latest research and the framework of my relational parenting method, we offer thought-provoking solutions to your deepest parenting struggles. Added bonuses include intergenerational wounding discussions and guest childcare experts. We will also start taking your parenting questions in episode 5, so be sure to comment with your biggest questions or email me directly at jenny@jennyb.co. Let's get started. Dr. Maiysha Clairborne is an integrative family physician, master practitioner of NLP and hypnosis, and founder of the Mind Remapping Academy, School of NLP, Hypnosis, and Timeline Therapy. A healer at heart with over 20 years of experience, she is passionate about transforming the lives of the people she coaches and trains by teaching them how to communicate more effectively and how to eliminate the fear, self-doubt, negative thoughts, and feelings that get in the way of their clarity, communication, focus, and productivity so that they have more confidence in themselves, attract more of what they want, and take their careers and relationships to the next level so they can live a life beyond their wildest dreams. As a speaker, trainer, and coach, Dr. Maiysha loves empowering her students and clients in business, entrepreneurship, and the power of the unconscious mind. Her own struggle with burnout is what originally inspired her to step outside the box, and her framework and programs now help doctors and medical professionals around the world reclaim their time, freedom, and peace of mind. All right. Welcome back to the Relational Parenting Podcast. We are here today with our guest, Maiysha Clairborne. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Hi.
Papa Rick.
We are so excited to have you. You are a wealth of knowledge. There will be an introduction before this recording where I list all of your credentials, but you're just fantastic, and the work that you do is fantastic. And I'm so excited for our audience to get all of the golden nuggets from you today.
All kinds of cool stuff.
Looking forward to the conversation.
So my first question for you is that you started off as a family physician, right? What kind of catalyzed that transition from being a family physician into all of the different work that you do now?
Yes, my career is a journey. The first thing I think is that I think that I've always been off the beaten path. Like that's just been. Maybe I attribute that to my mom, who I call the OG entrepreneur. I mean, she stuck out on her own. I think before it was super cool to do so, and so I was always very interested in different things. And so even as a family physician, I was interested in integrative health, like holistic, marrying traditional with the holistic. And as an undergraduate, I was a psychology major. And so I was always fascinated with the human behavior, why we do what we do, how the brain works.
Why are they doing
Why
this?
Exactly?
What are you thinking?
And I think it comes from a little bit of my upbringing as well. Having a little bit of trauma in my background, understanding why is it that I went through what I went through? Why did my stepfather at that time behave the way he behaved? Why? That was my question.
Yeah.
Why, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so going into integrative medicine, I really loved it because there was this opportunity for me to heal with the mind-body connection. But after a while, I know this just sounds weird, but I got bored. And I'll back that with the context. I think most family physicians go into family medicine because of the variety. Like we have these brains that are like, we want to do everything and serve everyone. which you can't
Yeah.
always do. And then I had the on top of that, the interest of how I marry traditional with holistic types of therapy. So I was an acupuncturist, and I learned energy medicine. I am a Reiki master. And then I,
Wow.
learned
Wow.
neurolinguistic programming. I've learned all these various things to be able to increase the amount of healing that I could do with people. But at some point, and I don't know where this came from, I just recognized that my work in clinical medicine would not be the ultimate thing.
Mm.
And I think there was this point where I got a little bit bored, but then I got complete. Like, you know what? I think I could stop seeing patients and be okay. But what could I do? I still wanted to impact patients. I just didn't want to have direct care with patients anymore. And so
Mm.
how could I still heal and yet, like, not be in this one-to-one clinical relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Part of the
Yeah.
catalyst for that also was that was around the time that I had my son, and that I had been in my
Mm.
career for 30, 8 years. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to create the type of career that would allow me the freedom to be there for my son at a moment's notice without there being repercussions to my income and the people that I served.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that was another part of it as well. And all of that led me into coaching. And so I learned, NLP, I learned hypnosis, I learned all of these things. I used them in my practice until it was time for me to do the next thing, which was coach burned out healthcare professionals.
Full circle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me, the way that that showed up as uh, impacting on an exponential level is that, if every doctor that I got to impact, I also impacted hundreds or thousands of their patients.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
it was sort of like an indirect sort of patient care in a way.
Moving up the food chain, extending your reach.
moving,
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
moving up the impact ladder.
Right. Right.
I love this.
Interesting.
I feel so. I just have to share really quick that
Hmm.
our paths are very aligned. I also studied psychology undergrad, and I constantly, I remember from like an early age, 5, 6, 7 years old, just looking around me at my family life or my friends or whatever, and just observing and questioning, like, why do they do that? Why is this happening? And I originally went to school for bio pre-med and switched to psychology. I did not become a doctor, but then the transition that you're talking about, going from one-on-one with people to shifting your impact to the people who are serving those people. I had the same realization a few years ago when I started my parent coaching journey, where I've been a nanny for so long, and I've worked with one or maybe two families at a time, and would provide ongoing care and education and all of these things. And then I realized one day, if I taught parents, I could reach so many more children
Yeah.
with my time and my energy and my
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
Just
Very
like you teaching doctors, you can now reach hundreds of their patients.
Yeah.
And that was
Sphere of
just,
influence. Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. And then what happened after that, talking about sphere of influence, is that when 2020 came around, we know all the things that happened in
yeah,
2020. We call it the tridemic, the isolation, the pandemic, and the racial tension and violence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for me, that was a significant turning point, because it was the time where I had trained. By this time, I had trained in neurolinguistic programming as a trainer,
mm-hmm.
and I had gotten the knock. Okay, it's time to teach the work that I've been using in
Yeah.
coaching, teach it to other healthcare professionals. But then when 2020 happened, and I was invited by who now is a very close good friend, but she's also my business partner, to step into social activism. And so then the
Hmm.
expertise that I have in communication, the expertise that I have in psychological safety and trauma, that then got mapped into organizational work and teaching, and it could have sort of got infused into the anti-racism teaching that I do and consulting that I do. But the psychological safety kind of is now standing on its own because we can look out at what's going on in a lot of organizations and corporations and see where the relationship between people is very transactional. And, you remember the Great Resignation. When you really start to dissect what that is, it comes from this lack of safety. It comes from this very transactional employees being treated like a number. So that's what led me into the organizational work. And again, I think that elevated my sort of sphere of impact. And so now the work that I do has two arms. I do still teach the communication to individuals. I have a course called Communication That Transforms. And I use that for the individuals and for organizations. But also I teach neurolinguistic programming and I certify other coaches so that they can go out into their respective communities and use this transformational work to heal the people that they want to serve. So those are sort of the two arms in which I work. And it's been a wild ride because I think that for me, the transition has been very, I've been called down each path. It hasn't necessarily been like strategically planned as much as it's been called. And then I've had to sort of strategically plan it in reverse to make it, work.
That's a really interesting combination, amalgam of skills that are not topical, but all very current. Last few, the pandemic and its effect on racial tension and work, and this is very cool. You are very much at the center of what's going on.
Yeah,
at least in America, it's going on all over the world. Isn't it
is, unfortunately.
So that's this is very cool. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
Awesome. So your transition kind of, you said that becoming a mom was one of the pieces that kind of took you through that transition. And I'm curious because a lot of what you are trained in and a lot of what you talk about parallels to parenting. And we talked a little bit on a phone call, about your parenting journey, but I'm curious to hear from you how all of this training, NLP, the hypnosis, the integrative medicine, how has that influenced you as a parent?
Yeah. Well, what I'll start with is that I'm, for those of you who cannot tell by my appearance, I am Gen X. Generation X.
We need little tattoos on our foreheads.
Right.
Label us.
Right.
Labels into the YouTube videos. Millennial.
Raised by, excuse me, raised by an old school boomer. And I always say that I think that my mom, she went through what she went through with me growing up, and she did the best she can with the resources that she had. And she has done her work. Like she has done the work of healing, and it has transformed our relationship. And so having said that, of course, I came out as an adult, I came out not even knowing if I wanted children based on my upbringing. And then when I decided to have children, it was, I'm definitely not repeating the mistakes of my mom. Now, of course, famous last words. Have I repeated some of those mistakes?
Right. Good luck with that. Yeah.
But the difference is, there's some awareness, and there's a skill set of apology, a willingness to apologize when I do mess up, so that sort of thing. So what I'll say in terms of like my training, it's interesting because when I trained, even up to being a trainer as an NLP and a hypnotherapist, practitioner and trainer, I did most of that while my son was still very young. So he was like toddlerville. And And so I feel like I was using the work at work and using the work with patients before it was in my awareness to intentionally use it with my son, which sounds
Mm-hmm.
bonkers, but that's just the way I was. Like, as a new
Yeah.
mom, you're just sort of like hanging on. And as a
Yeah,
Right.
no, there's a
yeah,
time. Yeah, it's a new experience. It's processing. You haven't
right.
formally gone out with it. Sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so then what happened was when I started running my trainings, he was already 4 by the time I started running my trainings. And that was when I really started to see, oh, this is all of the stuff that can work with kids too.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
more I taught it, the more it reminded me to implement it. And
Yeah.
yes, and
Intentionally. Sure. Yeah.
intentionally. And what's been very interesting is to see him internalize this work and internalize the skills and the language skills and use it sometimes to my for me.
That was my first question is when did he start? How old was he, or how long did it take for him to start turning it around and using it on you?
Uh-huh.
Mother, you're not
Child,
supposed to
it
say
was
that.
like he was only about 5 or 6 when I started hearing these elements.
Good kid.
And sometimes, and he's 9 now. So sometimes I would use these language patterns and he'd be like, "Stop trying to hypnotize me, mommy."
There you go. There you go.
Like, what
They
do you
keep us honest, man. They keep us
mean?
honest. Yeah.
He'd be like,
Stop
Right.
trying to
stop
hypnotize
using
me.
that language. Stop talking that way. I know what you're trying to do. I'm like, so yeah,
That's great.
Oh.
what it did do, I think, was it allowed me to access a little bit more playfulness because
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as this experiment. What? How
Mm-hmm.
can I how can I talk differently so that it's really a little bit of a game, so that he does what I need him to do when I need him to do it. Let's be
There you
honest.
go.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
We talk about authoritarian and, and controlling and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And that's just a perfect example of you don't just have to smack them with a stick to get them to do what you want. If
Yeah.
you have some tools, then it can be a little more peaceable. It can be a little more of a fun game.
Yeah.
It's like, so what do I need to do to make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. That's exactly what we're about here.
And I thought what's been interesting too is that as I teach the work, one of the things that comes up over and over is values, like what's important to me, but also what's important to him. And
Yes.
one of the things that I've learned is, I think as kids, as a child, nobody asked me what was important to me. Like,
Right.
what was important to me. But when I
Mm-hmm.
can listen to my son that way and, observe and see what's important to him, then I can actually speak into that and
Yes.
create a context of we're a team, we're a
Mm,
community,
Mm-hmm.
and really speak into the values. I can speak those values, but I can also speak into and what's important to you is, and thus, if you help me with this, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, son.
that's right.
Right?
Right.
Which unfortunately is good preparation for life,
It
right?
is.
You got to look at the whole, the gestalt, and it's like, well, so how do I get along in the world? That's what kids do.
Well, and it's relationship skill. You
Mhm.
like
Yep.
and in workplaces, in the real world, that's how you make it. That's how you create meaningful connections, is that you are in fact not just out for yourself, you're learning and valuing what other people are like, what their values are and what matters to them, and speaking to those things and creating authentic connections.
Yep.
And in the workplace, it's like, if you want to be a leader of any kind anywhere, you have to be able to speak to your employees
Yeah,
in their language.
that's right.
And
Yes.
I think that been one of the biggest transitions in parenting culture now, is that we've spent so many years and decades trying to get children to speak the language of adults. And what we really need is, as adults, as the educated ones, as the leaders, we have to learn their language first.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I think that I love how you talk about this, the shift of the culture of parenting. One of the things that I think is can be super fun as a parent, it can be a little annoying sometimes too, but is to negotiate with our
Yes.
kids.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
as you talked about, it is creating that life skill. And so one of the things I'll tell you my son is great at is negotiating
Mm-hmm.
and selling. And I have to
Yes.
the point where sometimes
Pitching.
I have to reframe myself and say, "Whoa, okay, this means he's going to be really good at getting what
Right.
he needs right when he's
Right.
grown."
But
But
yeah.
yeah, but he is a master negotiator, and it's something that as a child I was never allowed to do.
Mm-mm.
And it doesn't mean that I don't still get to set boundaries, because sometimes it just is not a negotiation. And sometimes
Yeah.
my one of my phrases is end of conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is
And
not a
that's the important
negotiation.
skill. You see people at work out in the world, and what they are is they're out of tools. They don't have the tools. They go and they want to accomplish something
Right.
for themselves,
Right.
or they get in charge of a team, and they get frustrated, and then they get dictatorial, or they do something that doesn't work. And so, teaching your children these skills and learning them yourself first. You got to do the work,
Yeah.
and then passing that on to yourself for a youth group, like you're doing, coaching, whatever, putting that out in the world. That's a real world changing thing that we can do as parents, is to learn and to give our kids those tools, because then they will run the world. That's
I mean,
bend
it
the
gives
world to
them
their.
resilience
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
flexibility of behavior. It gives them options in their brain.
There's
Like
always
when they
another thing to try, right?
Yes,
They're
like
not
when
out of options.
exactly. They come up against an obstacle. It's not like, "Oh no, I have nothing else to do." It's like, "Oh, how do I navigate around this obstacle?"
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
Mm-hmm.
Or fall
navigating
into
around us
victimhood.
parents' obstacles all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
I think
right.
I
That's
think
life.
that
That's what we're here for, is to hit
Exactly.
obstacles.
We're an obstacle to them.
right.
Get ready
I
for
think
them.
that resiliency is such a huge, like, I don't know. I feel like from person to person, the way that someone finds resilience is so different. Because in the context of this podcast, in the context of what I teach, resilience is created by letting your children negotiate with you. And sometimes the answer is just gonna be no, but they've tried 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to get what they want.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the answer, like, they're gonna you're gonna negotiate back, and you're gonna come to a conclusion together, right? And then they learn, sometimes this is going to work and sometimes it's not, and I'm going to get back up again and try again. And I think in the past in parenting culture, what I have seen is that resilience is built by your children, by your children constantly failing, or constantly hearing no, or constantly going through traumatic situations.
Right.
And there are adults that I know now who speak to resilience that they built during their childhood because of these terrible things that
Right.
adults did to them, or
Yeah.
these terrible, like, well,
Traumas, or
I mean,
sometimes.
traumas, but
Yeah.
then, yeah, just also on a less traumatic level, even just parents who gave them no voice whatsoever.
Yeah.
But there are kids who
Hmm.
come out of that more resilient and tough. There are a lot of people who come out of that meek and quiet and
It's
people
frustrating.
pleasers and scared to speak up, and who go the opposite way. And I think that the definition of how we build resilience is changing.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed it is. I do want to Can I clarify something?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one thing, I just want to clarify something around trauma because I think it's extremely important, is
Mm-hmm.
that even though it seems that a parent not giving a child a voice is less traumatic, it is still trauma. It
Absolutely.
is different. It's different looking trauma, and it's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And the turning out meek and unable to stand for oneself is part
Mm-hmm.
of a trauma response. The people pleasing is actually a part of a trauma response.
Trauma
It's the
Mm-hmm.
response.
yes, the tend to befriend response.
Mm-hmm.
So I
That would be interesting to study
yeah.
all the flavors of trauma
Oh yeah. Oh, we could have a
and
whole conversation about
manifestations.
that because
Yeah,
that's right
yeah,
down my lane. I
yeah.
just wanted to. I don't want the listeners to go away with, oh well, because I grew up in a home witnessing domestic abuse, right? That is a
Mm-hmm.
particular type of trauma. But I have
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
people who grew up and their parents like never they didn't have love in their family. Like, I had love in my family. I witnessed domestic abuse, but my mom hugged
Hmm.
me and she there was a lot of complexity in the relationship, right?
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
knew
Yeah.
that I knew that I was loved. But then there are people who grew up who they questioned it, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
because their parents were never present and they just threw money at them, which some people would
Mm-hmm.
be like, well, how's that traumatic? Well,
No
you
time
never
but
know until
money.
you're
Yeah.
in someone's shoes. So what is trauma
Hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
one person may not be trauma for another person. Trauma is
Hmm.
universal. So I just wanted to like
Mm-hmm.
make sure that the audience is clear that trauma looks
Yeah.
a whole lot of ways to a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Evan, there's a lot of traumas in the world. One way I think of it is there are traumas that are actually illegal,
Hmm.
that are obvious and cut and dried enough that
Yeah.
we've legislated
Hmm.
Yeah.
against them, and then there's a lot more that are, there's no actual law
Yeah.
against doing things. It's just not a great idea, and
They
now
just
we can
float under the radar.
manage it. Learn some skills to kind of manage the little ones ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think I appreciate that clarification, Maiysha, because I do think that that's a pervasive issue that still exists in parenting culture, is that, well, I don't beat my kid. I don't yell at my kid. Um, so they're fine.
Yeah.
So all these other mistakes are just mistakes, and I can always make up for them. And I think there's an element of like, yes, if you fail, if you have a failure moment as a parent, like going back and repairing and making up for it. But also, like, there are a lot of ways that we cause trauma
Hmm.
to our children, and we lay our anxieties or our fears or our shitty mindsets or we tell our we don't show our kids love in the way that they need to be shown love. We don't
Hmm.
truly know our children on an intimate level. And we stay surface based, and we feed them and clothe them and put them in school, and so they're going to be fine. But there's a much deeper level of emotional trauma that occurs.
Yeah.
And if you're not in tune with that, and you're not willing to look at that truth, then it does get exacerbated. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
Right, right. It's
Yeah.
like there's the physical trauma you can see, and then there's the invisible psychological and emotional trauma that you can't see.
Yeah.
And some
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it is loud and some of it is very insidious. But the good
Yes.
news, because I always like to bring people to the good news,
Yeah.
because parents be like, "Oh no, I'm traumatizing my kids. Oh, I'm
This is hard enough already.
oh
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
gosh." When I first started really delving into trauma, I was like, oh my gosh, my son, already I'm
Yeah.
traumatizing him, right? But
Yeah.
the good news is that the research shows that it only takes one stable relationship over
Mm-hmm.
time so that children become
Mm.
resilient and they bounce back. So just,
Mm.
Like a good role model,
yes, yeah.
right? If you got one, but okay, everybody doesn't have to be wonderful.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, I think that could be that's an impossibility that everybody's going to be. There's always
Exactly.
one. There's always
Exactly.
one that's often that's a little bit off
Right.
track. But I
Right.
think that we have to account for that children are very resilient. They are naturally resilient, and we can if we present them with the right environment to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so
Mhm.
I love what you said, coming back, Jenny, to the culture of how children are becoming resilient is changing. And
Mhm.
and also I think that we, to some extent swung from one extreme to the other for a while. And
Mhm.
so I do think there's, a subset of the younger generations that are still building, that are lacking resilience. And I'm going
Yeah.
to blame it on the Gen X, my generation of people who were trying to make it so much better for their kids
Mm.
that they took away. And it's not everybody,
Mhm.
but I'm saying I've seen it, they
Yeah.
took away the struggle. They
Yeah.
take away all of the opportunity for growth. And
Yeah.
so I think that especially with people like me who, middle class, live well, I've got this training, it would be easy for me for my
Mhm.
child to be going through life feeling like, oh, there's no obstacles in life. That would be very
Right.
easy.
Right.
And so I have to intentionally create these boundaries or these barriers or these obstacles so that he
Mhm.
can develop,
Yeah.
the resilience.
Don't
I
get them
may
all out
have
of
the
the way.
means to do something, but I may say no.
Yeah.
Yep.
There may be times I say no just so that he can experience no, right? Because I
Mm.
say yes a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. When people complain about the kids, I always, my first reaction is like, well, where's their parents?
Yeah. Well, who raised
Right?
them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who raised
You
them?
don't get to complain. In my generation, we don't get to complain about the Gen Xers or the Gen Zers or anybody, because we started that chain.
Right.
And so it's like, well, so what might you do different
Mm-hmm.
in the future with your grandchildren or
Mm-hmm.
whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
When you're talking with people, it's like back to the community thing.
Right.
We're all responsible for all these people. And so I agree. It's time for a reality check, time for a
Yeah.
correction. Most people would
Forget
not
that too.
survive a ride in a wagon out
Mm-hmm.
to the middle of Kansas anymore.
That's right.
It's not that kind of stuff.
I think as a society, a lot of struggle has been removed as well. So I think it has to be a very intentional awareness and intentional action taking to not let yourself or your children become so comfortable that, I mean, for me in my personal experience, when I get too comfortable, life gets boring, I get depressed. Like, and
Yeah.
I think that's true for a lot of people. And I think that people, the one that comes to mind is
I
cold plunging. And there's
hate that.
What? I'm not
okay, I love it. I've done it. I can't do it because I'm pregnant, and I hate that I can't do it. I can't do the sauna or the cold plunge. But there's research. There's
Yeah.
there are physiological benefits to both of those things.
Yeah.
But we are no longer exposed. Like, cave people didn't have cold plunges because they had to weather 0-degree temperatures
Right.
with no insulation, right? They had furs and they hid in their caves. But we don't experience the extremes of the natural world the way that we used to. And we
Our
don't have to
circumstances.
hunt
Yeah.
for our food, and we don't, and even something as basic as screen time, because nowadays that's such a huge topic in parenting, and something that makes
Yeah.
parenting so much easier when you're stressed out, when you're trying to cook dinner, when you just need 5 minutes to yourself, is putting your kid in front of a screen. And the more that you do it, the more that you do it. And I've seen the snowball effect in many families. And I'm not saying like 0 screen time. Don't ever let your kid look at a screen. But the amount of children's iPads that I see when I go out into the world that like the parents and children are just never interacting. And it's gotten to a level of comfort, of
It's convenience.
It's convenient.
Like everything else. Processed foods. That's why we all get fat,
processed
because we're sitting
foods,
around
the
eating.
grocery store. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy.
It's something, and there are wonderful parts of society where it has made our lives easier, but there's a line, and you have to find it for yourself, and you have to find it for your own family. It's going to be different for everybody. Where is the line of too comfortable?
Right.
Yeah.
Because then that's when children growing up in a too comfortable environment, not allowed to struggle through life's natural roadblocks, that they quit building resilience. They expect yeses, all of the time. And then they go out into the world and discover that that's not real.
Right.
And they fall apart and they have no skills to overcome it.
Listen, I think that some of the violence that we see, I mean, there's various, so we could say that there's the gun violence, right? The school stuff that goes on, kid being told no, a parent being told no, and rather than dealing with their anger in a different kind of way or dealing with that rejection, they go to a mechanism. I've seen in the younger generation, is very interesting, where women who have been approached or propositioned by men, like, hey, can I get your number? If they say no, violence incited against women for saying no to something like that. Like,
not used to hearing no.
Right. Not used to hearing no. And that is crazy to me.
That's just a lack of basic social skills.
Right. But then you got to look at the parent who didn't tell them no. Right.
Yeah.
Who didn't tell them no?
You don't get to complain about a kid without looking at the parent and going, how did that happen? You got to fix it in earlier generations.
Yeah. Or the other piece is, what were they watching in their household that when someone said no, they thought it was okay to incite that kind of violence? Because perhaps they grew up in a household where when someone said no, the other person incited violence until there was a yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, it's like, these are the things we look at, and understanding that it's interesting. I recently had this conversation that as a parent, we must understand that whether or not we are directly interacting in certain ways with our kids or not, our kids are always being impacted by our environment.
Yes.
Yep. We're teaching them whether we're doing it on purpose or not.
Exactly. They're watching the dynamics.
You're a major figure for a kid.
Exactly. They're watching the dynamics of the household. They're watching how we react. They're watching how we don't react, what we say, and
how do you talk on the phone to other people? And everything's an example.
Exactly. The way we treat people in restaurants,
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Just so it's like they're always watching and listening and learning and absorbing. And so that's why, Papa Rick, what you said earlier, which was, we got to do the work.
You got to, Jenny says this all the time, there's no way out but through, right? You can hunker down, but there's no real way out until you get through it and deal with it. And you can't really help anybody else do it until you've done it. I mean, you can support, but until you've walked the path, walking a mile in the other guy's moccasins kind of thing. It's a lot of parenting is doing a lot of work on yourself, like you were talking about earlier, and then realizing that's how you need to deal with your kids.
Yeah.
It's tough being a role model all the time. People talk about role models, sports stars and stuff like that. It's like, well, mom, dad, you better check yourself.
That's right.
Because you're a role model, whether you like it or not. Maybe that's the hard part.
Yeah.
You can't do it perfectly, and you're always on display with your kids. And so it is kind of a responsibility.
It really is. And it's interesting, I think, too, to note that for parents, especially first-time parents, but I think even with parents of multiples, that with every developmental stage that your child goes through, you're going to need to do more work. I
hate that. I hate that. I started off parenting going, I am going to nail this. We are going to figure this out. And then it changed. Next week it changes. It's like, damn it.
Just when you think you got it down, they turn 4 or
What's
they
up
turn
with
5. And then you're like, what is this new voice? Who is this new kid in my house?
Yeah.
What's this new attitude happening? Oh, they're in this developmental stage now. So they're like trying to get their autonomy or they're trying to do this. But you like go back to the developmental stages. And they are very intuitively connected to your buttons, right? Like, yes. So they will.
Well, they're studying them.
Oh yeah, they will press all of them with each developmental stage, and so it's just like the layer. It's a mountain with no top. This whole personal development thing as a parent,
Exactly. Well, that's how we get to enlightenment. What is it? Where are the Zen people going? I can't think of the word now, but it's my favorite analogy is after I watched Jurassic Park. And then I was teaching Sunday school or something. I had a crowd of kids that I didn't know what to do with. And I realized they're all little velociraptors. There's that scene in the first Jurassic Park, right? Where the game guy is introducing them to the velociraptors. And he sidles up and says, they're systematically testing the fences. They're intelligent. Yes. You can see it in their eyes. And I'm like, that's children. We are the fences as parents. At a community, and the kids are all velociraptors going, how do I get past this fence? Just because I want to. I don't even know what's out there. I'm just testing everything. And it's like, man,
that's how they learn.
Yeah.
They're learning.
Yeah. It's
which
a
is
great
what they're supposed
thing.
to do.
It's a perfect thing. They're just doing their jobs, but you got to learn where to put up fences and where to okay, you can, that I walk through there. That's not going to kill you.
Yeah. That's a brilliant metaphor. I love it. And yes, I might have to use that. I might have to quote you on that. That's a brilliant metaphor.
I would be honored. It's all yours.
But what's also interesting is that a lot of psychologists, a lot of therapists say is that them testing the boundaries, them doing that is an indication of them feeling safe.
Yes.
They'll only do that with the parents that they'll push the boundaries with the parents that they feel or the people they feel the most safe. They trust them to set the boundary, to hold the boundary, but they also trust them not to hurt or harm them.
Yeah, they're not afraid of the fence. Yeah.
I hear from a lot of moms tend to be the ones with the comfort and the safety. Not always, but I hear a lot of moms, and there's a million memes out there too of like, oh great, I'm my child's safe place, which means I get the worst of them most of the time. And and like you see little kids or any aged child come home from school where they've had to mask all day and behave and do the right thing and talk a certain way or
Control.
Whatever. Yeah. And they come home and they fall apart and they need to decompress or just like any of us, if go to work and come home, we need an hour before we're like ready to talk to anybody in our household or whatever it is. Like it takes a massive amount of energy to act right for 7 or 8 hours a day. And then you come home and fall apart. And I see it in preschoolers a lot. It's because they're so young, they're so little, they have no ability to hide it. They come home from preschool and they're just little velociraptors and they fall apart and they cry and they scream at every little thing. But their teacher is like, they were so wonderful and they helped this person and they wanted to be the cleaner upper and whatever. And they come home to you and you're like, why do you treat, it's hard not to take it personally when you are the safe place because you think you're doing something wrong. And the reality is like, you're actually doing everything right. They feel safe with you, but the reward, you don't get to see the reward of that. And unless you're really tuning in to like what other people are saying about your child, or when you see how functional and wonderful they are as an adult, or you watch them be in like a wonderful, healthy marriage, or, all these other pieces, that it's kind of a delayed gratification role, being a parent, being the safe place.
That is such a thing as a parent, getting a good report about your kid when they didn't know they were under observation. They're not yet aware of the parent network talking to one another. And come to think of it, that's a great reason to be part of a parent network. Be with other parents and make sure you say something. If you catch an admirable act, catch them being good, right? Make sure you pass that on to the parent. Because there's so much of them once they're out in the world. That's you don't get to see that. So let the parents know. Encourage the parents. That's a good point.
I think also I think being a part of a good parent network helps you know that you're not alone. There's so many conversations, where as much as I'm in the personal development space, but sometimes I just need to commiserate with my moms. I'm like, let me just tell you, like the first 5 minutes is, let me just tell you what my boy did. Is your boy doing?
Yeah.
Like, what's
this
happening?
is kicking my butt. Yeah. What is it?
Is this a 9-year-old boy thing? Or is my psychopath? Like, what's happening here?
Or is he an alien?
Right? And then they're like, oh, no, my son did this or my daughter did this. And we're like, oh, shoo, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
This is a developmental thing,
We're under the bell curve. We're in the middle of the bell curve. Okay.
Right. So I think that's another great reason to have a parent network, because you can do a little bit of commiseration, especially when you're a part of a parent network who has like minds, because you're going to commiserate, but then you're going to come back to, all right, this the solution oriented talk, or you're not, just slamming your kids. But what you're doing is you're getting the release. And if you think about, Jenny, what you said, the kids who have to act right the entire day, they have to mask the entire day. Imagine as an adult, people who have to do that, because, let's be real, people go to work and they have to be a certain way for their employer. They may be masking for their employer all day. And imagine someone, and their brains are fully developed for the most part, right? And
chronologically, anyway.
Speaking, right? They may be arrested in development.
The time has passed,
Right.
But then imagine, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or a small person whose brain is not fully developed, and how much more brain energy that takes. So when they come home, all they want to do is, and so, for my son, one of the things I know about him is, for him, he's a very kinesthetic person. And what he wants most when we get home is a hug. And so oftentimes, that's the way he gets to unmask. And then, I give him his space and he goes and he plays, and we don't do any TV during the week. He's allowed podcasting. He's not allowed even watching stuff on the device, but he can listen to podcasts while he plays with his Beyblade.
Beyblade. I don't even know what that is.
Like,
wow.
It's like an anime thing, this toy, and there's a spinner.
Okay.
And, yes, it's that. It's like, it's adjacent to Pokemon. If you've heard of Pokemon.
I'm so out of it.
Kind of Pokemon adjacent. But he's into anime a little bit. But so the first thing we do when we get in the house is I just hold him for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I hold him, give him that for however many minutes he needs it. Then I can go back upstairs, do what I need to do, finish my work for the day. He can decompress doing his play stuff for the day. Then we can come back together for dinner and just hang and have conversation, and then, do our son stuff for the rest of the day.
People forget. I'm sorry, sweetie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my husband and I have the same rule. It's one of our agreements that we established very early on, is that and it came from me needing, like, when I come home, like, I just need a long hug. Like, I don't want to talk. I don't I just need a long hug. And then, like, whatever he was doing, cause he used to, go to school from home. The pandemic hit when he was in nursing school. And I was nannying full time. And so I would be gone all day. He'd be home alone all day and going crazy. And I'd be like getting touched out and talked out and all of the things. And we'd come home and be on just completely different levels. And we eventually decided that this reunion, this end of the day reunion, he would stop whatever he was doing and greet me at the door when he knew I was coming home. And we would just hug for a minimum of 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I was like, I just need to lay on your shoulder for like a minute and a half, man.
Can I have 50 more seconds?
Yeah.
And then he can go back to doing whatever he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I need, half an hour or whatever to like unpack my lunch and just have silence or whatever. And then we'd come back together to have like an evening together, and he could tell me all about his day or what, whatever it was. But yeah, that reunion time when we're away from one another with our, like, specifically parents and children, or partners or whatever. But when you're away from each other for a long period of time and everyone's out in the world doing what they're doing, when you come home to your safe space, having even a 20-second ritual like that, where it's just like, okay, we're back together, we're reestablishing heartbeats and like safety and like
consciously managing that transition. That ritual was the word that came to my mind too. Was that's a great tool.
It is
to have in your toolbox and for your kids to witness.
Yes.
The thing I was going to jump in about was we forget how much energy our brain takes. The brain uses up like 20. I remember playing chess as a kid and just being exhausted at the end of a game, like I'd been playing. I couldn't figure out why I'd be hungry after playing a 2-hour game of chess. And that's kids. Anytime you're like at work, you're going from work you to home you or whatever. It'd be great to have be aware of it and have a ritual and make the transition, ditch the mask and some way to transition formally, kind of semi-formally. That's a great idea. I like that.
Absolutely. I think also in like demonstrating that transition and one of the things that I do with my son, because let's talk about, you got the introvert parents and extrovert parents and introvert kids and extrovert kids. And that's that could be a whole good conversation as well. But I'm
so complicated.
I know, right? I know. I'm a tested introvert. So I do like value that quiet time, that I need that transition time. And my job is to talk to people all day. Like that's my job. Like I'm in meetings or I'm coaching or I'm training or I'm consulting. And so one of the things that I have over time taught my son, and I use this phrase a lot, how my brain works or mommy's brain needs, right? And so sometimes, a lot of times, if I have a day with some breaks in it, then I can like drive to his school in silence. And by the time I get him, I'm good, because I know as soon as he gets in the car, he's going to be like, right? But every now and again, when I have an extremely busy day and I come directly from one thing to pick him up, and it's been like all day, I can say to him, I need 5 minutes of silence. I'll set the alarm. And he understands that. And he watches the alarm. And when it goes off, I can say, okay, I'm ready. Right. Yeah. And so that kind of communication helps to not only train your child on how to communicate their needs, but also it helps them to really understand and be able to honor what you need as well. And so now there's this thing that my son will do, because he always finishes dinner before me because he eats fast. I mean, and also because I always sit down to the table 5 minutes after him, because I'm usually making my dinner after his. He will ask me when he finishes, do you want me to stay and keep you company? Or would you like some quiet time? Or would you like some alone time? Yeah. And so sometimes I'll say, well, whatever you want. He's like, no, what do you want, mommy?
Aww. And this is really turning into emotional intelligence here. This is really cool.
Yeah. And so I, oftentimes I'll say, yeah, keep me company. Let's talk. What do you want to talk about? Or sometimes I will be like, you know what? I think I'll just take some quiet time. And he'll go and he'll play. And then, usually when I'm done and clean the kitchen, I'll go in there with him and then I'll give him, the specified amount of time that he needs, which, by the way, because children, their concept of time is just so different.
Yeah.
Parents be
Yeah.
thinking, oh, I got to spend hours and hours and hours and hours with my kid to make them feel like to be a good parent and to make, no, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
20
It's really
minutes.
management.
Yeah.
You know, you're consciously managing your feelings yourself. It's like, I need a minute.
Yeah.
You know, and communicating expectations and all those good, healthy, positive adult qualities, you know, you look for in a partner. 9-year-old kid can do it. That's cool.
I mean, that's like advanced relationship skills level that he can offer you to stay. Do you want me to stay at the table with you, or would you like some alone time? That's stuff that, like, that's consideration that, you know, my husband and I are still working on in different situations.
Exactly.
That's, I mean, adults struggle with that kind of awareness. And you also mentioned, Maiysha, the mom group, the parent community, you know, where you can just go in and spend the first 5 minutes just like bitching or being like, my kid did this. Like, does your kid do that? I feel crazy. And there's something about authentic communication that we're also, we talk about this a lot on this podcast, is that you can't just make everything sunshine and rainbows with your kids. You can't hide the reality of life, because then your kid grows up and they don't understand that other people besides them have needs, that they play a role in society. If they're not playing a role in your house where they're giving and receiving, and I think this is another parent culture shift, is that we went from, you know, we swung from kids don't speak unless they're spoken to sacrifice yourself and everything and your needs to make sure your kids' needs are met. And I feel like we're slowly in the last 10 years or so swinging back to a more centered area and a more balanced place of like, I'm a human being too. My child is a human being, and we need to be as real as possible, as real world as possible with our children inside the household, because what's inside the household needs to reflect what we want them to find outside the household.
Model the world that should
Not the worst part of what exists outside of our household. We don't need to be mean or rude or yell because that's the reality that exists outside the household. But we also can't cover up and be toxically positive all the time and pretend everything's okay either. Like, there has to be a real world balance inside of the home, and teaching your child that you also have needs and saying, hey, I really want to hear all about your day. I just need 5 minutes right now. My brain is really tired and it needs to rest for a minute, and just putting it in words they can understand at whatever age they're at. Your kid will be, oh my God, your connection with your kid will be so much deeper by simply communicating in a real way.
That we're all that way. That busyness in your head when you feel like screaming, I get that too.
Yes.
Let's all take, you know, you and me, we're the same. Here's how you manage that. Give me 5 minutes. You go play, whatever, and then we'll go. You're teaching them. That's great.
And I also think that we need to empower our kids with skills as well. You know, like, I think that from the swing from the kids are like the little Cinderellas and Cinderfellas of the house to now
Cinderfellas, I like that.
to now we have, you know, someone who cleans the house once a week, and they don't do anything, they don't cook, they don't do, you know, like that kind of thing. In my household, my son makes, you know, my son started making his own lunch when he was 4, supervised. My son will wipe the table. My son is now responsible for both the bathrooms. He's, you know, like, he sweeps the floor. I mean, I did chores growing up. That's one thing I you know, in terms of old school values, it's one thing that I kept, because I see now some of these young people, Gen Z people, who can't boil an egg or boil pasta.
Right.
And I'm like, how is that possible? Like I grew up in a house cooking whole meals.
Yeah.
Now I do know
What's
that
wrong with them?
could be cultural. Some of that could be cultural. Some of that could be circumstantial. Like, so a person didn't grow up, I have a friend she said, oh, I grew up on gas station food. So her circumstance was her circumstance. And so now she's learning how to cook. Yeah. And that wasn't me. Like I grew up in a household where I was responsible for dinner a lot of times because I'm the oldest and my mom worked and she was a single mom as well. And so
you were half mom.
Yeah. So I was helping like that. So I think that
you were parentified. That's a word.
I was definitely parentified. I was definitely, so, there's the balance. There was a balance between, I was a lock key kid, what do you call it? Lock key kid. So there's a balance between lock and keying our children and also, having them be without simple life skills like folding clothes and washing clothes and, cleaning your house and things of that nature, right? Knowing how to shop for food and things of that nature. Yeah. So
I think those last two things we talked about are conjoined, are joined together, because when your son started making his lunch at 4, did you jump in and correct how he was doing it overly? Or, did you you had to kind of lower your expectations for what a school lunch looked like a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Now, if you're going to expect your 4-year-old to make his own lunch and not leave a bit of a trail of destruction behind in the beginning till he's got some more practice or whatever, or gets older, that's going to be a problem. Those things, that expectation of perfection in the world.
Right, exactly.
And teaching things and allowing kids to practice and be horrible, and spill the milk once in a while and stuff, and becoming more competent sooner. Those things are, expectations of perfection in the world are not compatible with anything, including your own thinking.
Do things together too, like make it
fun.
A mess. My son will now come in and say, "Can I help you? Can I help you cook dinner?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what do you want to do?" I was like, "Why don't you put the water on for the pasta?" And then he's like, "Well, I want to put the ravioli in." I'm like, "Well, here's the spoon. Here's how you do it." And then when he eats his food, he has a different appreciation for it because he made it. And he's like, "Oh, it tastes good, Mommy." I'm like, "Oh, it tasted so good."
Yours is better than mine.
Ravioli that you boiled and put some.
That's right. That's right. The canned sauce. Convenient sauce.
Something we say all the time, though, is bring your kids into, and I see it in parenting. I see it in the nanny world all the time. Is like, we would, the expectation of nannies is to clean the house while the kids are napping, to clean up after, pick up the toys at the end of the day, make so that when the parents come home, the house is, they come home to a clean house, or whatever. And I see so many nannies being burnt out or feeling frustrated or whatever because they don't have a break or they don't have any time to themselves. But and something I started doing about 5 years ago in that career is I looked around, I was like, and it was about the same time I started becoming more and more aware of gentle parenting, relational parenting, these other research-backed skills that I was looking around and being like, this doesn't feel right. This isn't right. Like something's missing here. Exploring my own childhood, all those things. And I started after lunch, we would have 15 minutes before we would go up for nap time of cleanup time. We would clean up the kitchen. The kids would clean up their toys, or whatever it was. And then, we made it fun. We made it a game because they were really young. And then, there was a lot of resistance to bath time after dinner. And so I made up a song about naked babies and it became
Can you sing that for us now? I'd like to hear that song.
We'd be like, naked baby time. And they'd get excited and they'd smack their trays, their high chairs, and they'd sing the song and it was a whole thing. And it's just, I'd have them, the older one, I think he started cracking his own eggs for breakfast when he was 2.5.
Nice.
He would get up on his stool up on the counter next to me and he'd pull out the eggs and he'd crack his own eggs into the bowl and he'd dig the shells out if he dropped a shell in. And and I mean, all of these different pieces where like I started bringing them in to cook with me instead of being like, go play, go play, go play.
Right.
Or, they had a little cleanup set of like a little tiny broom, but a little tiny dustpan and a little tiny mop. And I'd pull out the vacuum and they'd want a vacuum. So I'd make it the mini, it was a Dyson where you could like detach the long thing and put the little short one on, and they'd run around on the floor and vacuum. And I'm like, this is great. Like, and they loved it. They would do they wanted to do laundry. Like they want to do the things we're doing. And it's also teaching them what goes into having a house and a household.
Useful skills.
Like the modern day Mary Poppins.
There you go. Just a spoonful of sugar.
Right. Right. But it was life-changing. And then nap time, man, I got a break. I got to eat my lunch in silence. I got to read a book. I got to watch a TV show. I got to just stare into the space silently. Like, no one asking me for anything. And
let your cortisol levels fall back to normal.
Yeah. I got to regulate myself for the second half of the day. Sometimes I would take a nap. Like, and that particular there was one particular family who, they were very adamant, make sure you take a break, make sure like whatever. And like, as long as the baby monitor's on, like take a nap. We don't care, and
they had burned out nannies before. You weren't
just living life with our kids versus having this separation between adult life and child life. Yeah. Like we all live in the same household. We all need the same things, like bringing our children into the daily activities is so important. It's so important.
Yeah.
It's amazing how often you can look at people and look at them as children. We were talking a little bit ago about, chronological age and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I just realized I'm dealing with a 13-year-old girl, not a 50-year-old girl. And how much that helps, those life skills that a lot of us didn't get. The earlier, say it again, the earlier you can give that stuff to your kids, it is possible to give it to your kids earlier, but you got to figure it out yourself a little bit and work on and then work on your kids. And it should all go relatively smoothly, barring avalanches and catastrophic things coming at us from the side.
Right.
This is great stuff.
Yeah. Maiysha, is there any topic that we haven't hit on? I mean, I always get towards like the hour mark and I'm like, there's so many things we didn't touch on. Is there anything specifically we haven't touched on that you want to speak to?
I think that we have had such a robust conversation. We have covered, we have covered from the window to the wall.
Pinball.
To the wall.
I'm sorry.
What is that from?
I couldn't help it.
Oh, we found something the boomer doesn't know. Yes.
Yes, never heard. That's at least two things I've let on that I don't know. That's not just two. Windows to the wall. I want
to know this one though.
You don't.
I'm going to Google it. If it's on Google, I'll know soon enough.
You'll find it. It's a song.
It's a song?
Yeah.
It's kind of a rock song.
Taylor Swift?
Yes, it's a Taylor Swift song.
Hannah Montana? Isn't everything a Taylor Swift song now? Yeah. She writes about so many things.
Yeah, we have covered a ton of stuff. And I mean, it's been an amazing conversation and so fun. And of course, we probably could talk for a whole other hour, but no, I think that this is
episode 2.
Episode 2.
Part two. We'll have to have you back.
Yeah, I would love it. You guys are awesome. You guys.
It may be a couple of years at the rate Jenny's people are scheduling guests. We'll have to do some jockeying.
I know. I better get rescheduled like tomorrow. So
right. Send my calendar link.
Get in the queue.
Get in the queue.
We're going to have to start doing 2 episodes a week. I've seen some podcasts that are like so popular that they're starting to do 2 episodes a week. And I'm like, that would be a dream. If I could, you were talking earlier, I think before we hit record, about podcasting being one of your favorite things where you just get to go talk to really cool people
Yeah.
and about the
Yeah.
things that you're passionate about. And I mean, that's why I started doing this, is like, and ultimately, like, if I can make a living podcasting, oh my gosh, like getting the word out there, spreading the word, like talking about what I'm passionate about, teaching, talking to people that are so cool and bring so many more perspectives to the conversation. Like that would just be a dream come true.
Yeah. And passing it on, the idea of passing it on to parents and passing it on to kids who are listening to people
Right.
talking about parenting, going,
The
oh,
impact.
and or this is, it's just a pursuit in making the world a little bit better place. Spend some of your time improving the world, or the world is never going to improve, folks. If not us, who? If not now, when? And all that good stuff. So yeah, this is good stuff.
Can you imagine? This is just the last thing I'll say. I just thought about this as we're talking. Can you imagine your child, my child, grown people with children of their own listening to this podcast? That's the kind
It's
of
creepy.
legacy.
When I think of my kids listening to this,
Yeah.
And their kids, it's kind of like, oh my God, it's out there.
Right. I'm like, wow. And when I think about my podcast, when I think about being on other people's podcasts and the legacy, because this is evergreen conversation.
Yeah.
And it's
That's right.
conversation
This is forever.
timeless and eternal.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very
I'm
cool.
going to have to go back and edit all those podcasts, make sure I didn't say anything I don't want out there forever.
I was talking to one of my friends who, she and I have a phone call 3 times a week. We're both entrepreneurs, and we kind of like check in with each other and keep each other accountable and stuff. And in our last conversation, we were talking about some of the stuff that our parents do or don't do or don't understand now that we're becoming parents. How things have changed, like how birth culture has changed, how, all these different things. And I said to her, I was like, do you ever think about our kids in 20 or 30 years and this dumb shit we're going to say to them to try to give them advice in a culture that we no longer understand?
Yeah, it's a new world, baby.
Because things change so rapidly, especially now. Things change so quickly, and with social media and the access to information, the level of learning and the spread of information is so fast. So I think, and I haven't taken a moment to think about what I'm doing now being watched by my children. And that is such a profound thought that actually gives, like, it's motivating. It feels like it all of a sudden just became even more important.
Well, and I when I was sitting around talking with your friends after your wedding, I was so impressed by how much information, like you say, there's so much more information that you can go dig up. You don't have to go to the card catalog at the library and into the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature and find a reference. You just type in a keyword and it's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy encyclopedia available. The things we're learning here, that's great. That's knowledge. You can read about it, but there's head knowledge and there's heart knowledge, right?
Yeah.
There's emotional stuff. And so what it's making clear to me is that what we are transferring to our kids, whether it's via a podcast in 30 years when your babies are growing up or not, is keeping it real, is, like, here's an idea and whatnot, but telling our stories to help make things real to people. That's what grandma and grandpa have now, because grandma and grandpa can't keep up with the new culture. We're too busy rubbing liniment on our aches and pains and stuff. Going to the doctor's appointment,
Right?
Gave me chills. There, you gave me chills. That's
an excellent thought.
Yeah.
Humbling thought.
Thank you so much for being here, Maiysha. Yes. Your contribution to the podcast is priceless and
inestimable. Yep.
And I think a lot of parents are going to reap a lot of benefits from this conversation. Tell people where they can find you. I'm interested in your NLP training. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Sign us up for that. How much does that cost?
Yeah.
Get in the loop on that.
Yes. So the website is mindremappingacademy.com. That's mindremappingacademy.com. And there you will find all of my information about the training. You'll also find a little bit of information about the Communication That Transforms course. And even on the front page, you can download a little taster. And then, of course, if you're a parent who's in an organization and you're like, we want her to come speak to our people, there you can reach out to me that way as well. I also am on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. That's probably my favorite platform because of the work that I do with organizations. So, and I am on Facebook and I am on Instagram. So that, and it's all / Dr. Maiysha. So DrMaiySha on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, and I am on TikTok.
Girl,
I am.
Are you shuffle dancing or are you?
So I do some stuff on TikTok, but it's all / Dr. Maiysha. And then finally, if you want to learn more, hear more about the kind of work that I do, you can listen to my podcast, which is called The Black Mind Garden. Yeah, and you can find that on any of your favorite podcast platforms. It's called The Black Mind Garden. And it's just, we have conversation about communication, about mindset, about all of the things of life and how our thoughts play into that. Our beliefs and our thoughts play into those things.
Yes. Beautiful. And we will link every single one of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening right now, you can just scroll down, click the link, and find you anywhere and everywhere. Awesome. We will see everybody next week. Happy parenting and good luck out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maiysha.
Well, did you learn anything new? Or have you heard all of this before? Do you agree with us, disagree with us, have a question? We want to see you in our inbox or via the Patreon page in the show notes. Tap on either link to send us your feedback, share your own parenting story, or support our mission of providing a connected community for all parents. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you loved this episode, click on that little star and give us 5 of them so we can get visible to other parents who are looking for us. This is your weekly reminder. Parents, you already have everything you need inside of you. You are a strong, loving, capable parent. And here, you are never alone. I'll see you next week.